The courtroom is silent when the judge looks down and asks one question that changes everything. Mr. Brown, were all of your wives truly informed, or were they legally misled? Cody doesn't answer right away, and in that pause, years of love, loyalty, and betrayal begin to unravel in public. Before this story ends, nothing about the Brown family will ever look the same. So stay with me, and tell me in the comments right now, who do you think is telling the truth in this family? The camera of our imagination opens on a long hallway outside the courthouse, fluorescent lights humming softly above worn beige walls. The air smells faintly of old paper, coffee, and stress. Christine sits on a wooden bench, hands folded tight in her lap, her leg bouncing even though she keeps telling herself to stay calm. Across the room, Janelle stares at her phone, but isn't really seeing anything on the screen. Mary stands near the window, arms crossed, watching clouds drift slowly past as if they belong to another life. One where family problems don't end up under oath. Cody arrives last. His footsteps echo louder than he expects. He straightens his jacket, lifts his chin, and forces a confident smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Robin walks just behind him, her face carefully composed, eyes glassy but controlled. No one speaks. No one needs to. The silence says everything. Inside the courtroom, wood creaks as people take their seats. The judge hasn't entered yet, but the tension already feels heavy, like the air before a storm. This isn't just about paperwork or money. This is about decades of promises, private rules, and a family structure that always lived half in the shadows. The narrator's voice stays calm, almost gentle, even as the story shortens. This case didn't begin here. It started years earlier, when cameras followed smiling introductions and family meetings that looked warm on television. What viewers didn't see were the contracts signed without full explanations, the finances blended and separated in confusing ways, and the quiet resentment that grew every time one voice carried more weight than the others. Christine remembers the first moment she felt something was wrong. She's on the stand now, fingers gripping the edge of the witness box. Her voice is steady, but her eyes betray her. She explains how decisions were framed as family choices, even when she didn't agree. How money moved accounts without clear consent. How emotional pressure replaced legal clarity. She doesn't sound angry. She sounds tired. Cody shifts in his seat. His jaw tightens. Across the room, Robin watches Christine closely, her lips pressed together. Every word feels personal, even when it isn't aimed directly at her. The judge listens carefully, occasionally jotting notes, asking simple questions that cut deeper than accusations. Dates, signatures, conversations, what was said and what was assumed. And this is the moment where everything you thought you knew about this family starts to crack. When Janelle testifies next, the tone shifts. She's practical, measured, almost businesslike. She talks about finances, shared assets, unclear ownership, verbal agreements that worked when trust was strong, but collapsed when relationships did. She doesn't accuse, she explains, and that somehow makes it more devastating. The courtroom grows quiet, again, the kind of quiet where people stop shifting in their seats. Then, Mary takes the stand. Her testimony is the most complicated. She speaks of loyalty, of staying long after love faded, because she believed in the structure, the faith, the promise that endurance meant something. Her voice trembles only once, when she admits she never fully understood her legal standing, or lack of it, until it was too late. Cody finally reacts. He leans forward, whispers urgently to his attorney. His confidence cracks just enough for the room to notice. Robin's turn hasn't come yet, but everyone feels it approaching. Stay with this story, because the next voice you hear will change how you see every relationship in this family. As the judge calls for a short recess, the camera follows the Browns back into the hallway. No one looks at each other. Christine exhales shakily. Janelle rubs her temples. Mary stares at the floor. Cody steps aside with Robin. He speaks quickly, low enough that no one can hear. Robin nods, but her eyes flick toward the other women. Not with anger, but something closer to fear. Because when court resumes, she knows she won't just be defending herself. She'll be defending the story that held this family together. And for the first time, that story is being questioned under oath. What Robin says next won't just affect the verdict. It will decide who the audience believes when the truth finally comes out. The courtroom doors open again, and everyone returns to their places. But something has shifted, like the temperature has dropped a few degrees, and no one can quite explain why. And when Robin finally takes the stand, the room seems to lean toward her without realizing it, her hands clasped together, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes already shining, as if she's been carrying these words for years. And she starts softly, talking about love, about joining a family she believed was already built on trust, about how she thought plural marriage meant shared sacrifice. But as her voice steadies, the story changes, and she begins to describe how decisions were made around her, not always by her, how she relied on Cody to explain what was fair, what was legal, what was just how things worked, and Cody nods along at first, almost relieved, until Robin pauses and admits she never fully understood the financial structures either, that she signed documents because she was told it, protected the family, not realizing it shifted power and security in ways she only understood much later. And a murmur ripples through the courtroom, subtle but undeniable. Because this isn't the defense Cody expected. It's something messier, more human, and far more dangerous. Christine's eyes narrow, not in anger, but in recognition, like pieces clicking together too late, while Janelle leans back, exhaling slowly as if she's replaying old conversations in her head, and Mary stares straight ahead, expression unreadable. The judge asking calm, precise questions that gently pull at Robin's narrative, clarifying dates, intentions, consequences. And with every answer Robin gives, it becomes clearer that no one fully understood the system they were living in. And that realization lands heavier than blame ever could. And right here, the story stops being about villains and victims, and starts becoming about something far more unsettling. A family trapped inside its own unspoken rules. The camera of the mind drifting back to flashbacks of family meetings where smiles hid confusion, where phrases like "trust me" replaced contracts, where emotional loyalty became currency. And Cody is called to the stand next, the tension spiking instantly, his posture confident but rigid, like a man bracing for impact. And he speaks with authority at first, explaining his intentions, emphasizing leadership, responsibility, tradition, but when questioned about transparency, about whether every wife had equal access to information, equal power to say no, his answers slow, his words carefully chosen, and the courtroom senses blood in the water. Christine watches him now with a mixture of sadness and disbelief, remembering how often she swallowed doubts for the sake of peace. Janelle's pen taps once against her notebook, a sharp, nervous sound. Mary's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly, and when the judge asks Cody whether emotional pressure can invalidate consent, There's a long pause. Too long. The kind that echoes. And if you've ever wondered when control crosses the line into coercion, this is the moment that question becomes impossible to ignore. Cody finally answers, deflecting slightly, insisting everyone chose freely, but his voice cracks just enough to reveal uncertainty. And that crack widens when the court introduces financial records, timelines showing shifts that coincide not with group decisions, but with private conversations. Cody's attorney objects. The judge overrules calmly, and the air thickens, because this isn't just about money anymore. It's about trust, and how easily it can be reshaped when one person holds all the explanations. Robin looks down, her hands trembling now. Christine wipes at her eye angrily, frustrated with herself for feeling emotional when she promised she wouldn't. Janelle closes her eyes briefly, steadying herself, and Mary's thoughts drift to all the years she defended the structure, believing endurance meant purpose. Stay with this moment, because what comes next reframes every sacrifice you've seen on screen. The testimony moves into private communications, text messages, and emails that reveal confusion, misalignment, wives asking questions and receiving partial answers, or answers that changed over time, and the courtroom feels less like a place of judgment and more like a mirror reflecting years of unresolved tension. Cody's authority eroding not through accusation, but through accumulation, detail by detail. And when court adjourns for the day, no one speaks again in the hallway, but the silence is different now, heavier, more personal. Robin lingers near the restroom, breathing deeply, her composure cracking for the first time. Christine stands by the window, staring at the same clouds Mary watched earlier, realizing they both felt trapped long before they admitted it. Janelle scrolls through old notes on her phone. P. Brer, P. Brer, P. P. Brer, P. Presents 11:15. Timeline suddenly making painful sense, and Cody steps outside alone, the cold air hitting his face like a slap. Because for the first time, the story isn't about how the world misunderstands his family. It's about how his family may have misunderstood him. And this is where the real emotional fractures begin to surface. The kind no verdict can easily repair. Inside the courtroom, the judge reviews notes quietly, expression unreadable. While somewhere between legal arguments and lived experience, the truth continues to unfold, not as a single revelation, but as a slow, devastating realization that everyone thought they were following the same rules, when in reality, they were all playing different games. And as night falls and the courthouse lights dim, one question hangs unanswered, heavier than any accusation. If no one fully understood the system, who truly benefited from it? And who paid the price without ever realizing it? Morning comes too quickly, the kind of morning that feels unfair, because nothing inside anyone is settled, and as the courtroom fills again, the air carries a sharp mix of anticipation and dread, whispers bouncing softly off wooden benches, as people sense that today won't just continue the story, it will deepen it, and the judge enters with the same calm authority as before. But even that calm feels heavier now, like it's pressing down on everyone at once. And the first witness called isn't one of the wives, but a financial expert, someone neutral, someone who doesn't care about emotions, faith, or television narratives, only patterns, numbers, and timelines. And as charts are projected and dates are read aloud, the story shifts again, becoming colder, sharper, more unforgiving. Because numbers don't soften the way people do. They just reveal. And the expert explains how funds moved, how shared accounts slowly transformed into fragmented ones, how risk pooled unevenly, and how legal protections favored some over others, not necessarily by malicious design, but by default, by assumption, by silence. And Cody's shoulders stiffen as he listens, his face tightening each time a date overlaps with a family argument viewers once saw as harmless TV drama. Christine's breath catches when she recognizes one timeline, lining up exactly with the moment she first voiced unhappiness. Janelle's eyes widen, as if a puzzle she's been working on for years finally clicks into place. Mary's lips part slightly, the realization landing quietly but deeply, and Robin stares at the floor, tears slipping now without restraint. Because this version of the story doesn't accuse, it simply shows. And right here, the truth stops feeling emotional and starts feeling unavoidable. The expert finishes, and the judge thanks them, dismissing them with a nod that feels final. Then the courtroom pauses, like everyone is holding their breath at once, and Christine is called back to the stand. This time, not to explain feelings, but to respond, and her voice is different now, steadier, edged with something new, not anger, not sadness, but clarity. She talks about how she trusted that fairness existed even when she couldn't see it, how she believed love filled in the gaps where legal structure didn't, and how slowly she realized love doesn't protect you when confusion becomes policy. Her words land gently but firmly, and the room listens, not because she's loud, but because she's honest. And when she finishes, there's no dramatic flourish, just a quiet exhale. Like she's been holding this truth in her chest for years. Stay with this moment, because this is where emotional loyalty finally gives way to self-respect. Janelle follows, and her testimony cuts in a different way. Methodical, composed, almost surgical. She explains the math of survival, how she budgeted, how she compensated, how she tried to protect, not just herself, but everyone, believing the system would balance itself out eventually. And when asked if she ever questioned the fairness of it all, she pauses. A long pause. Then admits she questioned it constantly, but chose stability over confrontation, because confrontation felt like betrayal. And that word hangs in the air. Betrayal. Heavier than any accusation so far. Mary's turn is last, and it's the hardest to watch, because her testimony isn't about money or leadership. It's about identity, about how being the first wife became both her anchor and her cage, how legality gave her status but not security, how she stayed because leaving felt like erasing herself, and when the judge asks her why she never demanded clearer protections, her answer is devastatingly simple. She didn't think she was allowed to. And if you've ever stayed quiet because you thought your voice didn't count, this is the moment that hits closest to home. Cody returns to the stand after them, and the contrast is stark, because now he isn't responding to vague emotion, he's responding to detailed testimony. And his authority feels smaller under that weight. He speaks about responsibility again, about tradition, about intention, but the words sound rehearsed, like defenses built for an older version of the story. And when the judge asks him whether leadership without transparency can still be considered fair, he hesitates, and that hesitation ripples outward, touching every person in the room, because it confirms what no one wanted to admit, that power existed without accountability. Robin is called again, briefly, and this time her composure fully breaks. She admits she benefited from protections she didn't understand at the time, that she trusted explanations without questioning who they served. Her voice cracks as she says she never wanted to be favored, only safe. And that admission reframes her role entirely, not as a mastermind, but as someone who stood closest to power without realizing its cost to others. Christine watches her with conflicted emotion, sympathy tangled with resentment. Janelle nods faintly. Mary looks away, unable to process both understanding and hurt at once. Don't look away here, because this is where blame stops being simple and starts being shared. The courtroom grows quieter as the day wears on, fatigue settling in, not just physical, but emotional. Like everyone has been carrying someone else's truth on their back. And when the judge calls for another recess, this time the hallway feels different again, heavier, but clearer. Christine and Janelle exchange a look, brief but meaningful, an unspoken acknowledgement of shared understanding. Mary stands alone near the wall, processing years of loyalty through a new lens. Robin sits on a bench with her head in her hands, sobbing silently. And Cody paces near the exit, running his fingers through his hair, frustration etched into every movement. Because for the first time, he isn't fighting accusations. He's fighting reality. And reality doesn't argue back. Remember this feeling, because it's the calm before the most emotionally explosive confrontation of all. As court reconvenes for closing statements later that afternoon, the judge signals that the end is approaching, but no one feels resolution yet, only exposure. And as attorneys begin to summarize, weaving emotion and fact together, the audience realizes something unsettling. No verdict can undo what's already been said. Unstrong insert parentheses, wherever it resonates. And, as attorneys begin to summarize, weaving emotion and fact together, the audience realizes something unsettling. No verdict can undo what's already been said. As attorneys begin to summarize, weaving emotion and fact together, the audience realizes something unsettling. No verdict can undo what's already been said. Unstrong, insert parentheses, wherever it resonates. No verdict can undo what's already been said. As attorneys begin to summarize, weaving emotion and fact together, the audience realizes something unsettling. No verdict can undo what's already been said. But no ruling can return the family to who they were before this room, force them to listen to each other fully. And as the sun dips lower outside the tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the floor, the judge announces that deliberation will continue, the decision not yet ready. And that delay lands like a final twist, because now everyone must sit with the truth a little longer, without closure, without escape, just reflection. And as the Browns file out once more, one question pulses beneath every step, louder than any testimony. If the system failed everyone in different ways, what does justice even look like now? And who will still be standing together when the answer finally comes? The wait for the decision stretches into days. And by the time everyone returns to the courtroom again, exhaustion hangs in the air like a low fog, settling into shoulders and faces. Because waiting is sometimes more brutal than confrontation. And when the judge finally takes the bench, the room straightens instinctively, hearts pounding with the quiet hope that clarity will finally arrive. Yet instead of an immediate ruling, the judge speaks slowly, deliberately, explaining that before any legal conclusion can be reached, there are final questions that must be answered. Questions not just about documents and intent, but about impact. And that word alone sends a visible ripple through the Brown family, because impact is harder to argue against than intention. And Christine is called once more, her posture calmer now, almost resolute, like someone who has already crossed the emotional point of no return. And she talks about life after trust breaks, about how realization doesn't explode all at once, but creeps in quietly, moment by moment, until one day you wake up and understand that the structure you defended is the very thing suffocating you. Her voice doesn't rise. It doesn't need to, because every word lands with quiet precision, and Cody watches her, not angrily, but with a look that borders on disbelief, like he's seeing her for the first time without the lens of expectation. And this is where the story stops being about the past and starts being about survival. The judge listens, then turns to Cody with a question that feels almost gentle on the surface, but cuts deeply underneath, asking whether leadership ever required him to prioritize clarity over control. And the room holds its breath as Cody answers. /bridge, 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 bridge, 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 /bridge. Because this isn't about legality anymore. It's about character, and he speaks slowly, acknowledging mistakes but framing them as necessary burdens of leadership, insisting that someone had to steer the family, that too many voices would have led to chaos. And while his words make sense in theory, they falter in practice, because the faces around him tell a different story. Janelle's expression tight, with restrained emotion. Mary's gaze distant. Robin visibly torn between loyalty and remorse. And the judge presses further, asking whether chaos is worse than silence, whether order built on confusion can truly be called stability. And Cody hesitates again, that same hesitation, now familiar. And it lands heavier this time, because it confirms a pattern. Stay right here, because this hesitation says more than any confession ever could. Janelle is asked to speak next, not as a witness to facts, but as a witness to consequences, and she talks about resilience, about being the practical one, the problem solver, the woman who made things work when they shouldn't have, and how that role slowly became a trap, because being capable made her invisible, her needs assumed, her sacrifices expected, and her voice cracks when she admits she's not angry about the money, but about the years she spent convincing herself that fairness would arrive eventually if she just endured long enough. And that endurance cost her parts of herself she can't get back. The courtroom feels heavier now, not tense, but grieving, like something important has already been lost. Mary follows, and her words are quieter than before, almost fragile, as she describes the loneliness of legality without intimacy, of status without security, of being the foundation everyone stood on while she herself felt increasingly hollow. And when she says she stayed because she thought leaving would mean she failed, the judge's expression softens, because failure, in this context, has been wrongly assigned for far too long. If you've ever confused loyalty with self-erasure, this moment is meant for you. Robin is the last to speak, and her testimony is the most emotionally raw yet, because she isn't defending or accusing anymore. She's confessing, admitting that she stepped into a system already fractured, that she accepted protection without asking who lost it, that she trusted assurances because questioning them felt like threatening the family she was desperate to belong to. Her tears fall freely now, her voice shaking as she says she never wanted to be the safe one if it meant others were exposed, and that admission lands painfully across the room. Christine looks at her, eyes softening despite everything. Janelle nods faintly, understanding the complexity even as the hurt remains. Mary closes her eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of shared regret, and Cody looks down, finally unable to meet anyone's gaze. Don't miss this shift, because this is where blame dissolves and responsibility becomes unavoidable. The judge leans back, fingers steepled, absorbing not just testimony, but transformation. And when they speak again, the tone is different, less judicial, more human, explaining that the court can rule on assets, agreements, and obligations, but it cannot repair trust or redistribute emotional labor. And that acknowledgement feels like both relief and devastation, because it means justice has limits, and the ruling, when it comes, is careful and measured, outlining changes to financial responsibility, recognizing imbalances, mandating clarity where confusion once reigned, but stopping short of naming villains. And that restraint is intentional because the real reckoning has already happened, quietly, painfully, in the moments where each person finally saw the system for what it was. And this is the truth no verdict can rewrite. As the judge adjourns the court, the room exhales collectively, but there is no celebration, no victory, only release. The kind that comes after prolonged tension finally loosens its grip. And in the hallway afterward, something unexpected happens. Christine and Robin exchange a few words, not dramatic, not reconciliatory, just honest, acknowledging pain without reopening it. Janelle stands nearby, listening but not inserting herself, comfortable now in her own clarity. Mary lingers at the edge, uncertain but lighter, and Cody stands apart, watching the women who once revolved around his vision, now standing firmly in their own. And that realization hits him harder than any ruling ever could, because leadership without listening has finally left him alone. Remember this image, because it marks the emotional end of an era. Outside the courthouse, cameras flash, voices call out, but the Browns move past them quietly, each lost in thought, processing not just what was decided, but what was exposed. And as they go their separate ways, the story doesn't feel finished, only transformed. Because the aftermath of truth is never immediate, it unfolds slowly, in private choices, in boundaries set, in futures rewritten, and the final question lingers, unresolved and deeply human. Strong P, P-word P, P-word P, P-word P, P-word P, P-word P, P-word P. Now that the system has been stripped bare, who will choose to rebuild, and who will finally choose to walk away for good? Weeks pass after the ruling, and the silence that follows is louder than the courtroom ever was, because now there are no questions left to answer publicly, only choices to make privately. And the story shifts away from benches and gavels into living rooms, quiet kitchens, late-night thoughts, and the emotional aftershocks no verdict can settle. And Christine is the first to truly step forward into this new reality, waking up one morning with a sense of calm that surprises her, realizing that for the first time in years, her decisions no longer need approval. Her breath feels deeper, her posture lighter, and even the memories that once hurt now feel like chapters instead of chains. She starts rebuilding routines that belong only to her. Morning walks without tension, conversations without fear of consequence, laughter that doesn't feel earned through endurance. And when people ask her if she's angry, she pauses before answering, admitting she was once, but anger takes too much energy to carry forever. And what she wants now is peace. And if you think the story ends when the court does, this is where you learn that healing is its own battle. Janelle's aftermath looks different, quieter, more internal. She sits at her table one evening with papers spread out in front of her, not because she has to, but because she wants to understand her life fully this time. She recalculates, reorganizes, reclaims a sense of control she didn't realize she'd surrendered. And there's sadness there, yes, but also pride, because she recognizes how much she held together for so long, and instead of resenting that strength, she finally honors it, setting boundaries that feel awkward at first, but empowering with every repetition. While Mary's journey is the slowest and the most fragile. She moves through days like someone learning to walk again, unsure where she fits without the role that once defined her. She grieves not just relationships, but identity. The idea of who she thought she was supposed to be. And in quiet moments, she confronts the hardest truth of all, that staying wasn't always loyalty. Sometimes it was fear dressed up as commitment. And naming that truth hurts, but it also opens a door she's never allowed herself to see before. Stay with this realization. Part P, Part 2, Part 2, Part. Because it's the one that takes the longest to arrive and the hardest to accept, Robin struggles differently, carrying the weight of being both protected and blamed. She feels relief mixed with guilt, safety tangled with shame, and in private moments, she questions every decision she made without questioning enough. She tries to reach out, not for forgiveness, but for understanding, learning that sometimes intentions don't matter as much as outcomes. And that realization humbles her in ways no courtroom ever could. She learns to sit with discomfort instead of defending against it. And that quiet accountability begins to reshape how she sees herself. While Cody's aftermath is the most isolating, because the structure that once gave him purpose is gone, stripped of authority, stripped of certainty, and left with reflection instead. He walks through spaces that once felt full and now feel echoing, realizing that leadership without connection is just control in disguise. And for the first time, he isn't being challenged by anyone else, only by the questions he avoided asking himself for years. Don't underestimate this phase, because losing control often feels worse than losing love. Conversations between the family members are rare now, but when they happen, they are honest in a way they never were before. Shorter, clearer, less performative, and that honesty is both freeing and painful, because it exposes how much energy was spent maintaining appearances, and as each person adjusts, the audience senses the shift too, realizing that this story was never just about plural marriage or legal systems. It was about communication, power, and the cost of silence. About how systems fail, not because people are evil, but because they stop listening. And that truth lingers long after the drama fades. This is the moment where reflection replaces reaction, and it changes everything. Christine speaks openly about choosing joy without guilt. Janelle talks about redefining partnership on her own terms. Mary tentatively explores a future that doesn't require permission. Robin learns to separate belonging from protection, and Cody confronts the reality that authority isn't love, and love can't be managed like a system. And while the family will always share history, they no longer share illusion. And that may be the most honest outcome of all. The camera of imagination slowly pulling back from individual moments into a wider view. Showing not a family broken, but a family transformed by truth. Strong, yet clearer. Wounded, yet awake. And as the story pauses here, not ending, but breathing, one final question quietly emerges, meant not just for them, but for everyone watching. When the structures we depend on fall apart, do we cling to what was, or do we finally choose who we want to become next? Time keeps moving, indifferent to emotional aftermath, and as months pass, the story deepens in quieter but sharper ways. Because this is the phase where consequences stop feeling dramatic and start feeling permanent, where choices echo instead of explode. And Christine feels it first when she realizes her happiness no longer needs to be explained or justified. She notices how peace feels unfamiliar at first, almost suspicious, like she's waiting for permission to enjoy it. And that realization makes her smile sadly, because it shows how deeply the old system trained her to doubt herself. She begins speaking more openly, not to accuse, but to clarify, telling her story in her own words instead of reacting to others' versions. And every time she does, her voice grows steadier, more grounded. And this is where viewers realize healing isn't loud, it's consistent. Janelle's life becomes an exercise in intentionality. She stops defaulting to practicality for everyone else and starts applying it inward, making decisions that once felt selfish now feel necessary. She learns how to say no without explanation, how to step back without guilt, and how to accept that being dependable doesn't mean being endlessly available. And there's a quiet grief in that shift, because it forces her to acknowledge how much she gave away without ever being asked to stop. But there's also relief, because boundaries finally feel like protection instead of punishment. Mary's journey remains the most emotionally complex because reinvention requires letting go of the version of herself that survived by shrinking, and she wrestles with that daily, sometimes missing the familiarity of pain simply because it was known, and in moments of doubt, she wonders whether clarity arrived too late, whether rebuilding at this stage is foolish or brave. And the answer isn't immediate, but slowly, through small choices, she discovers that courage doesn't have an expiration date. Stay with her here, because growth that begins late often cuts deepest. Robin's internal reckoning intensifies as public perception lingers heavily around her. Peon, bracket, bracket, peon, 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 bracket. A stoop, steeple, part from you ways now, no longer shielded by the system that once framed her as protected. She confronts the uncomfortable truth that safety gained through imbalance still carries responsibility, and instead of deflecting, she starts acknowledging harm without centering herself, learning that accountability doesn't require self-destruction, just honesty. And that shift, though quiet, marks a profound transformation. While Cody's isolation forces a reckoning he never anticipated, without constant roles to perform, he confronts his own narrative, the story he told himself about leadership, sacrifice, and control. And he begins to see how easily certainty became armor, how often authority replaced vulnerability, and that realization unsettles him deeply, because it means the fractures weren't caused by rebellion, but by rigidity. This is the moment where power loses its disguise. Interactions between them are rare but revealing. When Christine and Janelle speak, There's mutual respect without obligation. When Mary joins a conversation, it's cautious but sincere. When Robin reaches out, it's careful, stripped of defensiveness. And when Cody appears, he's quieter now, listening more than speaking, learning the cost of words withheld too long. And the audience feels the shift, recognizing that this phase isn't about reconciliation or revenge. It's about reckoning, about understanding how systems persist because people normalize discomfort, and how breaking free often feels worse before it feels better. And if you're still watching here, this is where the story becomes uncomfortably relatable. Moments of reflection replace confrontation. Scenes of solitude replace spectacle. And the emotional tension comes not from shouting, but from silence, from questions unanswered, from futures unwritten. And the realization settles that the court didn't end the story, it exposed it. And exposure demands response. And as each person responds differently, the narrative fragments into parallel paths, none of them easy, none of them clean, but all of them honest. And that honesty is the most unsettling outcome of all, because it leaves no one to blame and no illusion to hide behind. Remember this phase, because it's where transformation becomes irreversible. As time stretches forward, the audience senses that whatever comes next won't look like the past. Whether reconciliation ever happens or not becomes less important than authenticity. And the final image of this chapter lingers quietly, each person standing in their own space, no longer orbiting a single center, learning that separation doesn't always mean failure. Sometimes it means truth finally has room to breathe. And the question that remains isn't who was right or wrong, but who is willing to live honestly now that the system no longer tells them who they are supposed to be. As the story moves further from the courtroom and deeper into consequence, something unexpected happens. Distance creates clarity, and clarity brings confrontation of a different kind, quieter, but more piercing, because now each member of the family is no longer reacting to crisis, but responding to truth. And that response exposes wounds that were once hidden beneath routine. Christine feels it when old memories resurface, not with pain, but with perspective. Moments she once blamed herself for, now revealing patterns she was never meant to fix. And that understanding changes how she speaks about the past, not softer, but truer. She no longer edits herself to protect a system that doesn't exist. And in doing so, she feels a strange grief for the woman she used to be. The one who thought endurance was the same as love. And this is where the audience realizes growth often comes with mourning. Janelle experiences her reckoning in solitude during late nights when the house is quiet and thoughts grow loud. She revisits choices she once justified as practical and begins to see how often practicality became permission for neglect, not from others, but from herself. And that realization stings, because it means no villain can carry all the blame. Only responsibility can, and she starts to articulate needs she never practiced saying out loud. Needs that feel awkward, almost foreign, but undeniably real. Mary's confrontation is internal and relentless. She revisits old conversations in her mind, not to punish herself, but to understand why silence felt safer than truth. And when she finally admits that she feared being unnecessary more than being unhappy, the weight of that confession nearly brings her to her knees, because it reframes decades of loyalty as survival, not devotion. Stay with this truth, because it's one many people avoid their entire lives. Robin's reckoning unfolds publicly and privately at once. Because perception now follows her everywhere, she senses the unspoken judgments. Bree is supposed to avoid confusion. Just forget their stories ending here. P, end. P, end, here. Ah, the simplified narratives, and for the first time, she resists the urge to correct them, choosing instead to sit with complexity. To accept that being misunderstood is sometimes the price of accountability, and that growth doesn't require applause, only consistency. And this shift humbles her, forcing her to decenter herself in a story where she once felt like the focus, while Cody's confrontation arrives like a slow, inevitable collision. Because, without the family structure to reinforce his identity, he must face who he is without authority. And that question terrifies him more than any legal ruling ever did. He revisits moments where certainty replaced curiosity, where leadership silenced dialogue. And though regret creeps in, it's tangled with defensiveness, making reflection uneven and painful. This is the point where change becomes optional, but stagnation becomes visible. Communication between them becomes sporadic, but charged. Small exchanges carrying years of subtext. Christine and Janelle share moments of mutual understanding that don't need explanation. Mary listens more than she speaks, absorbing what it feels like to exist without a prescribed role. Robin practices restraint, learning when to speak and when to simply acknowledge. And Cody struggles most with listening, not because he can't hear, but because hearing requires surrender, and surrender feels like loss. And the audience feels the discomfort of this phase because it mirrors real life more than spectacle ever could. If you're still here, this is where the story quietly dares you to reflect on your own silences. Tension no longer explodes. It simmers, lingering in pauses, in unanswered messages, in conversations that almost happen but don't. And that simmering reveals the deepest truth of all, that systems don't collapse in moments. They erode over time through unspoken compromises, and rebuilding doesn't start with reconciliation. It starts with honesty, and honesty often isolates before it connects. As weeks turn into months, each person begins to settle into their chosen distance, not out of bitterness, but out of self-preservation. And that choice reshapes the emotional landscape entirely. Christine builds joy intentionally. Janelle builds stability consciously. Mary builds identity carefully. Robin builds accountability quietly. And Cody stands at a crossroads, forced to decide whether reflection will lead to humility or harden into resentment. Don't miss this crossroads, because it determines whether cycles repeat or finally end. The story pauses here, not with resolution, but with recognition. So because recognition is the true climax of long-term emotional narratives, the moment when everyone understands what happened, even if they don't agree on how it should have been handled. And that understanding changes everything. The audience senses the weight of this chapter because it offers no easy villains, no clean redemption arcs. Only human beings confronting the cost of the roles they played, willingly or not. And as this session closes, one question lingers heavier than any accusation ever did. Now that everyone sees the truth clearly, who will choose growth and who will choose comfort, even if comfort means staying exactly the same? The final session begins in a hush, the kind that carries both exhaustion and anticipation. Because after months of confrontation, reflection, and quiet reckoning, the Browns are now facing not courtrooms or cameras, but themselves. And the weight of all their choices presses on every step, every glance, every breath. Christine wakes early that morning, sunlight spilling through the blinds. And for the first time, she feels an unusual sense of calm. Not because problems are solved, but because clarity has arrived. And clarity carries its own quiet power. She moves through the house, observing spaces she once filled with compromise and obligation. And she notices how small gestures, pouring coffee, arranging chairs, turning a page in a book, feel like reclaiming territory that was once ceded to confusion. And this is where viewers understand that healing often begins in the mundane. Janelle, meanwhile, sits at her desk, reviewing notes, letters, and messages she never had time to read fully before. And as she organizes, she realizes how much of her life was reactive, how many choices were dictated by circumstance or expectation rather than personal will. And that realization unsettles her, even as it liberates her. She drafts plans for what she wants to achieve next, not seeking approval, only clarity. And every decision, however small, feels like a declaration of self-respect. While Mary's day is spent in quiet reflection, walking along familiar paths she once traversed with invisible rules weighing her down. And she notices the freedom in being alone, the power in deciding how to spend time without guilt. She revisits old memories, not to mourn, but to understand patterns of dependence and loyalty that shaped her. And in naming them, she gains subtle authority over her own narrative. Stay here, because this is where internal liberation becomes visible. Robin faces the public eye again briefly, but differently now. She speaks in interviews, but with intentional honesty, acknowledging her past missteps without defensiveness, and each word she speaks signals a willingness to accept complexity. And that willingness shifts perceptions, not because everyone agrees with her, but because sincerity resonates. While Cody wrestles privately with reflection, walking through empty rooms that once echoed with direction, authority, and expectation, he confronts moments where confidence overshadowed compassion, where certainty silenced dialogue, and where leadership became a substitute for intimacy. He journals, speaks with advisors, and finally allows himself to sit with discomfort, understanding that power without listening is hollow, and humility without acknowledgement is impossible. And this is the turning point where authority meets accountability. Family interactions unfold slowly throughout the day. Cautious but meaningful, Christine and Janelle exchange thoughtful observations, brief, but laden with years of shared history. Mary participates selectively, careful with her voice, but attentive to honesty. Robin listens as much as she speaks, integrating lessons from prior months. And Cody now primarily observes, allowing the voices around him to carry weight, a reversal that would have been unthinkable months before. Yet here it feels natural, almost necessary. And the audience senses the significance of this shift, recognizing that transformation isn't always explosive. It often arrives in measured, deliberate adjustments to behavior and thought. The story's tension now comes from subtle dynamics, pauses pregnant with meaning, glances that communicate decades of accumulated emotion, and the challenge of balancing truth with compassion. As evening falls, the family gathers briefly, a small, deliberate act of connection, not spectacle. And in the living room, the air is heavy, but sincere. Christine speaks first, carefully, articulating boundaries and desires for the future, emphasizing respect over compliance. Janelle adds practical insights about shared responsibilities. Mary reflects on her own needs, acknowledging past silence. Robin expresses accountability and intentions for fairness, and Cody listens, absorbing the totality of these perspectives, understanding that reconciliation is less about agreement than recognition. Stay focused here, because this is the moment where closure begins to root itself in reality, not fantasy. Dialogue flows with pauses that speak volumes. Occasional laughter breaks the tension, not forced, but emerging organically from shared acknowledgement of human complexity. And as the night deepens, the family disperses individually, each person carrying insights into the days ahead, walking away with awareness of personal responsibility, relational dynamics, and the cost of prior assumptions. And though no dramatic gestures mark the end, the audience feels resolution in these small but profound shifts, understanding that growth doesn't require spectacle, only honesty and persistence. And as the final images settle, each member of the Brown family stands metaphorically at a threshold. Christine poised with autonomy, Janelle empowered by intentionality, Mary embracing self-definition, Robin practicing conscientious accountability, Cody confronting the limitations of authority, and the story closes on a quiet but powerful note, inviting reflection not just on their journey, but on the universal questions of trust, communication, and personal evolution, leaving viewers with one lingering, poignant question to comment on, reflect upon, and carry with them. Now that the masks are off and the truths are laid bare, who among them will build a new legacy? And what choices would you make if placed in their shoes?